All right. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Neil Chase. I'm the CEO at CalMatters, and we are, with the help of the California State Library, taking a story a month that we've reported on and digging into it more deeply to create curriculum for use in libraries and schools, and having these conversations to help everybody get a little deeper into the issue and understand kind of more what's behind it and some of the possible solutions. And so I am joined today by Carolyn Jones, who's an education reporter at CalMatters. Carolyn, good morning. Good to have you here.
Thanks. Good morning, Neil.
Um, I would like to start, if you don't mind, with just a little bit of your background, because you have covered education long enough that you've seen the changes over the years. And if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about your background in general, and especially your coverage of education. I'm especially thinking about the coverage you did of it before and during the pandemic and then after, because obviously the pandemic has had such a big effect.
Sure. Yeah, I've been a reporter for a long time, and for the past 5 or 6 years covering education exclusively. I worked at EdSource for many years, pre-pandemic, through the pandemic, and then now I'm covering K-12 education for CalMatters. So yeah, and plus I've had 2 kids in public school through all this, so I'm pretty familiar.
Right. The other form of education we all have about public education in California, right?
Right.
Let me share with everybody, in the menu at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a Q&A option. And if you'd like to use the Q&A option to throw questions in, we will happily take them. We'll make sure to stop toward the end for some questions, but also happy to take questions as we go along the way. Carolyn, the topic for this morning is teacher turnover and the difficulty in keeping teachers in classrooms, and the issues that we had. Certainly, this is not new, right? We had problems before the pandemic. It got worse during the pandemic. But the idea that there were once, schools in California that were well-funded, that were the best in the country. My impression is that we were cranking out a lot more teachers who were ready to go into those classrooms. And lately we've had trouble filling those classrooms, right? And it's a lot of factors. But the results are classes that are understaffed, right? An achievement gap that's getting worse in California. Give me your sense of what are sort of the major factors that are causing the turnover in teacher tenure and causing some people to choose to leave the profession.
Well, teaching is hard. Teaching is hard work. And it's harder now than it used to be, probably, in a lot of classrooms, partly because of the pandemic, because students have, they've experienced some trauma, they have some mental health challenges, families have been really hard hit in some parts of the state, and students are more likely to act out. Classrooms are harder places to be in some areas than they used to be. Also, poverty in California has been rising pretty steadily. And, if you look at the data, there's a pretty even correlation between poverty and student achievement. So in places where kids struggle with poverty and their families struggle with poverty, you're more likely to see lower test scores, higher rates of discipline, higher rates of absenteeism, and so forth. So as poverty goes up, classrooms in some areas are definitely harder places to be. And, there's a big pay differential too. The average teacher pay in California is about $88,000 or something, but it could go as high as well over 100, or in some areas, below 30. So there's a huge range about how teachers are compensated.
And where does that differential come from? Why is it that one teacher might be making 30 and another one is making over 100? Is it strictly experience?
Yes, it is, for the most part. But districts, negotiate their own contracts with their local unions. It's not mandated by the state. There's no state teacher contract. And so each district has different amounts of money to spend, different priorities. It's a local control issue. So that's why teacher pay varies so greatly. And it has to do with the local cost of living and a lot of other factors.
Which makes a difficult job sometimes even more difficult if you can't afford to live there, right? And some jurisdictions have started playing with the idea of trying to figure out how to help teachers find housing, right? Either providing housing for teachers, giving teachers a housing allowance, trying to figure out ways to allow teachers to live somewhere that's not hours away from the school they're teaching in. Is there any place that you've seen that's doing that well, that is setting an example yet, or is it still kind of a fantasy?
Well, I think a lot of districts are getting started in that direction. I mean, it's always a question of need, right? I mean, there's always going to be a need for more housing, especially in places like the Bay Area or more expensive parts of the state. So I know in Silicon Valley, certainly in Oakland, you know, in a lot of San Francisco, a lot of areas are starting the ball rolling on that, but it might just be a couple of units here and there. So, you know, it's going to take a while and it'll never be enough, really. I mean, what we're seeing statewide is that with the teacher shortage, high needs schools and high needs districts are being more affected by this because it's harder work and the pay tends to be less and teachers tend to leave. And so what we're seeing is schools with the students with the highest number of needs have the least experienced teachers, which has kind of creates this vicious
Yeah, a
circle.
real gap, right? And then the achievement gap gets worse, right? In terms of students in better funded school districts with more experienced teachers are doing better on the test scores than the ones in these high need districts.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, the data tracks pretty closely to that.
And how do we define a high need district? What makes a district higher in need?
Well, you know, poverty, the number of kids who qualify for free and reduced lunch, those children are more likely to suffer, you know, from a lot or experience a lot of other challenges, like they have to move more frequently, which can be really disruptive, or their parents have kind of unstable work situations, and so it might be hard to get them to school. They might have other issues at home. They might live in neighborhoods with a lot of crime. You know, there's a lot of other factors that kind of relate to high poverty. So there's that, and then student achievement. You know, when students are a couple grade levels behind, it's really hard to catch them up. It's, you know, students get discouraged. It kind of, you know, there's a mental health factor in there. And if you're a teacher and you have some kids who are at grade level and some kids who are 3 or 4 grade levels behind, it's very difficult to teach everyone at once and find a way to, you know, get everyone on the same page. So that's
Yeah.
definitely factors into, you know, what we call high needs. And discipline is an issue. You know, I think if you talk to teachers, they say, you know, discipline, especially post-pandemic, you know, discipline is really a challenge. You know, some kids are really acting out.
Yeah, discipline and just engagement and attendance, right? Attendance overall is down. Students are absent more, which then reduces the amount of funding the districts get. How bad is it post-pandemic?
It's bad.
Yeah,
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 attendance is definitely at a crisis level, I would say. I think chronic absenteeism in California was something like 30% last year or year before last, and which is, you know, pre-pandemic, it was under 10%. And the numbers are getting a little bit better, but I mean, 30% is just, it's completely an unacceptable level. And, you know, schools are trying all sorts of things to kind of lure kids back to class and, you know, get teachers more engaged. I mean, you know, one thing teachers say too is with the absenteeism rate is so high that they actually don't have that many kids in class sometimes. And it's different kid. It might be different kids, you know, like today, these kids show up, tomorrow, a whole different set of kids might show up. And so they're constantly sort of having to readjust their lesson plans and try to catch up kids who've been gone for a couple of weeks and still manage to give attention to the kids who've been there every day and who are, you know, it's really a challenge.
one question that came up in the chat: what are the reasons for that absenteeism, and especially post-pandemic? Why is absenteeism up so much since the pandemic?
Well, I think it really varies for older kids in high school. They're the ones who are largely in charge of getting themselves to school. And so at that level, it's more a question of engagement. Those students are choosing not to go to school themselves. And it could be that they're really far behind. It could be some students say they're being bullied. They don't want to go to school. They don't like school. They're moving around a lot. Some students are working full time to support their families, and school just it's too inconvenient. Some students say they don't really see the value in it because they don't particularly see themselves on a college track, or, they just don't see the point. And then at the younger grades, like middle school and elementary school, those kids are reliant on their parents to get them to school or a school bus. And so in that case, it's the parents might have a million other things going on and they can't always get their kid to school. Either they work crazy hours, or they work really early, and, they might leave a 7-year-old in charge of a 3-year-old, it's really a challenge for some families, or some families, the parents themselves, aren't that engaged in the school, and, So schools are really trying to kind of address it on two levels, with students directly, but then also trying to figure out what the needs are for the whole family.
And it's got to be sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If fewer people show up for class, the teacher has to go over the same information again or do different things with different kids. The kids who are there are going to get less engaged. It's a cycle that's going to be really hard to break, right? It's not clear how we get out of this current morass, right?
Right. I mean, there's a lot of really smart people who are doing great things in this and doing research and coming up with plans. And a lot of districts are trying really hard. I know this to kind of reverse things. And people are well aware of what the problems are. And districts are being very creative. Some school districts send social workers over to family's house. What do you need? What are the problems? Do you need help with housing? We'll help you find housing. Do you need a job? We'll help you find a job. Do you need help with English skills? We'll give you that. Some districts are, they're holding fairs, or they're trying to make school a more welcoming place. They're holding, parent nights. They're trying to make school more fun, safe, welcoming. So the family, to rebuild any kind of trust that might have been lost during the pandemic, and make families see school as, hey, this is my place, this is my community, this is where my kid goes every day. So schools are trying really hard. And then at the teacher level, in an effort to keep teachers in these kind of high need schools, I mean, there's all sorts of incentives that districts are looking at. Pay is a problem because the teachers union opposes that, but, grants to teachers who stay in those schools, smaller class sizes is an incentive to stay, more support, from the administration, setting younger teachers up with mentors, access to affordable housing, like we talked about, mental health counseling, not only for the students, but for the teachers too.
That's a question that came up. Cheryl asked a question: do the teachers have tools for dealing with students who are having mental health challenges, right? Like you mentioned earlier, there are more mental health challenges among younger folks than there used to be, or at least we've identified them. It's possible that they were there before and people weren't seeing them as clearly or understanding them. But how much capacity or tools do the teachers, what does the teacher do with when they spot a mental health problem with a student? Is there support there in the schools to help those students?
Well, that definitely depends on the school. Some schools have been really, they have great social emotional learning programs, and they have teachers, check in with kids every day throughout the day. How are you feeling? How are you doing? And then trying to, build in little things throughout the day, meditation, times to just sit and talk, kind of to make kids feel more comfortable in the classroom. And if they're having an issue, get a chance to talk about it. Or, a lot of schools are hiring more counselors. They're using some of their COVID relief money to hire mental health professionals to work on campus, or sending a kid to, if a kid is really having a bad day, sending a kid to a social worker to find out, what is there an underlying problem here at home, or things like that.
Yeah. You mentioned this briefly before, but let's go back to it about pay, right? It would seem if teachers are leaving because the job is harder, and especially in districts that have higher need, higher poverty, higher challenges, why wouldn't you just pay those teachers more and say, this is a tougher job, we should pay more for this job? And it's almost counterintuitive to hear that the unions don't support more pay for these teachers. Help us understand that, if you can.
Sure. Well, yeah. Well, the teachers union, the California Teachers Association, has been opposed to this for a long time, because the idea has been floated for a long time. And I mean, their reasoning is that, there should be transparency in salary schedules, and that everybody should be able to know what everyone else is making. And you can't really single out a particular group of teachers and give them more money, because it might not be fair to other teachers who might be facing other challenges. And also they say it could be implemented arbitrarily or unfairly somehow. And they support higher pay for all teachers, regardless of where they teach.
And you mentioned that that local school districts negotiate their own contracts with their own unions. Can a local school district simply say, we want to negotiate with this union, we're going to pay teachers in disadvantaged schools more? And can the union accept that, or does this have to be done at the state level if this additional pay for teachers is going to be possible?
Well, to my knowledge, so far, no union has gone for that. No local union has accepted that. I mean, the
Yeah,
complicated thing too is that within a single district, there might be some very high achieving schools and some very low achieving schools. And so are you going to, I mean, how do you address that in a contract? I mean, do you break it into several little contracts, or do you, how do you define low achieving or high needs? It gets complicated.
yeah. I mean, we did come up with a plan that was supposed to give more local control to school districts, right? This local control funding formula where the school puts in money, sorry, the state puts in money, and the local school district gets to make more decisions about how the money is spent, how it's working, what's important to their community. Is it actually working? And do these schools, can they, in different districts, address these teacher shortages in meaningful ways, or is there just not enough money there to do it?
Well, that it really depends. Yes, you're right. California about 10 years ago enacted this thing called local control, which does give school districts and school boards quite a bit of autonomy in how they govern and what kind of policies they adopt and how they spend their money from the state. And so, the research so far said, yeah, for the most part, this has worked. It was intended to kind of help kids who had the highest needs, because kids with higher needs get a little bit more money from the state. And so they're saying, well, yeah, it has helped. It has helped those kids. As much as they need to be helped, no. I mean, we can see the achievement gap is still terrible. I mean, if you look at every single measure of student accomplishment, there's, attendance, discipline, you still see a big gap there. So not as much as it should. And of course, there's never enough money for schools. But some
Right.
districts, raise money independently too, through PTAs or through education funds. And so they do have, or, local school bonds, that kind of thing. So they do have more money than other districts.
No, when we attend journalism education conferences, right, we see 25 students there from one school because the school's foundation paid for the trip. One of the questions we have is mentioning a podcast called A Time to Stand that has been interviewing teachers who left California and say they're leaving because of the curriculum. Teachers don't like the curriculum that they're required to teach in California. Is that something you've heard reported on at all, or do we understand what motivates someone to say something like that?
Well, I mean, the curriculum wars are obviously, front center here in California and Texas, Florida, a number of states across the country. And curriculum has always been a hot topic. What are kids actually learning in school, whether it's evolution or, English literature or whatever. And right now, yeah, I mean, California has adopted new curriculum and new textbooks. And there's those textbooks and curriculum are vetted and there's a lot of chances for the public to have input on it, and they're reviewed, and the whole process takes years and years and years with experts and public hearings and so forth. And then at the end, they come up typically with 5 or 6 textbooks that schools can choose from. So even then, schools have some autonomy about what they pick, some choice. But yeah, I mean, I have no doubt there's some teachers in California who've left for Texas and some teachers in Texas who've come to California.
Yeah, yeah. We hear so much about Texas and Florida. And we've heard some stories, certainly, the state superintendent went to Southern California and was booted out of the school board meeting over the issue of teachers being required to notify parents when their kids say they're trans. Are Texas and Florida really much worse than California, or do we just hear more about that? And are there a lot of the same kind of challenges in California?
Well, I think, I mean, Texas and Florida and some red states have banned more. The book banning thing is more of a big deal there than it is here. I mean, it hasn't come up that much in California, but in Florida, it has come up a lot. And I think the state has actually banned a bunch of books or told districts, you may not have this book in your library, for example. So it has not come up as much in California. In fact, California just passed the governor signed a bill that would basically ban book bans. So California is kind of heading in the opposite direction there.
But obviously, it's a large, diverse state, and no group of 39 million people all moves in the same direction with the same thoughts.
That's right.
There's a question that came up. By the way, if anybody else wants to ask a question, feel free to put it in the Zoom chat or the Zoom Q&A function. A question about school choice, right? Both, the idea of vouchers in some places and even just charter schools. And how do teachers Do we think teachers are finding a more comfortable place to be in charter schools? Do we think something like school choice helps or hurts the turnover of teachers in the public schools?
Well, I mean, it depends who you ask on that. I know the teachers' unions, generally speaking, again, this is very general statement, are opposed charter schools and vouchers. I mean, there are some charter schools in California that have teachers' unions, so it's not an across the board statement. And again, generally speaking, charter schools and private schools have a little bit more latitude, and teachers there have a little bit more freedom about how they teach or what they teach, or, you know, what a school day looks like even. So yeah, some teachers prefer that, whereas some teachers prefer to be in a bigger system with more supports and so on.
Yeah. So the superintendent of schools, who, full disclosure, is also running for governor, has a program to give people $20,000 if they'll become a California teacher, $20,000 towards your education, right? You'll become a California teacher and work in an impacted school district, I think for 4 years after you graduate. Is that kind of program going to make a dent? Is that going to be 2 more teachers, 5 more teachers, or is this that or anything else you've heard that really feel like solutions at a California size scale to the kind of problem we're facing with just not having enough teachers to fill the classrooms?
Well, I think it's great to make it easier to become a teacher. I've heard lots of people say, especially mid-career professionals who want to be a teacher and might have a lot to offer, but they're not in a position where they can take a year off and pay money and go to school and not work and all that to get a credential. So there's lots of things that the state and districts are doing to make it easier to become a teacher. I think the issue is, how do you keep those teachers? Because teacher turnover, as we've been saying, is really high, and most people quit within a few years and go into a different profession entirely. So the question is, how do you keep these people, and how do you make this a really sustainable career choice for people? And really listen to what they have to say and support them and make them feel like they're making a difference and that they're appreciated and well compensated.
Yeah. We got another question in about charter schools. Is the achievement gap are the test scores higher in charter schools and therefore the achievement gap lower? And if so, why?
Well, not necessarily. No, I would say no.
Some schools, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. There's definitely exceptions out there, and there's some charter schools that do amazing work with students who really need a lot of help. On the whole, no, there is not much difference.
Okay. So, as a journalist, your job is to be the observer, to learn about this, to write stories, to ask questions. But if I was to switch your hat for a minute and put you in charge of state education, or in charge of the entire California budget, the $300 billion that we have in California, 40% of which goes to education. How do we fix this? Where, if you had a magic wand, right, where is it simply more money for all the teachers in the state? Is there anything else you see that's proposed or working that feels like it might be the right solution or a solution to reducing this teacher turnover? And then the fact that the schools in wealthier neighborhoods have teachers who are so much more experienced than the schools in low-income neighborhoods. Let's assume that if we could double every teacher's pay in California, you'd have more people teaching. Is there anything else you see on the horizon being talked about that feels promising?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not just money. I think, Learning Policy Institute did a study. I mean, it's money. Teachers tend not to go into teaching for the money. I think they just want to support themselves, Yeah. So it's not just money. It's somehow we have to make their workload a little easier. I think it's overwhelming, especially for a lot of new teachers. I just hear this over and over and over again. The credential requirements are very difficult. And then it continues, and you have to clear your credential. Even after you're in the classroom and have been teaching for a couple of years, it still goes on and on and on. I mean, we have to somehow reduce the paperwork, and we have to make it easier for people to become teachers. And then once they're in the classroom, give them more support. Mentoring, smaller class sizes, and then, social services. People really seem to like these community schools, which are something Gavin Newsom has really allotted a lot of money for. There are schools that have social services on campus, medical care, dental care, mental health services, food banks, whatever families need. And those seem to have been really successful. My kids went to a community school and people like them, and teachers seem more engaged there because they feel more supported, because there's more, they're not the only ones having to act as social worker, everything, mental health professional. They have that support.
There's also a question about childcare, right? A teacher's salary might be, by the time you pay your rent and you pay childcare, you might as well not be working, right? And so it seems like, is that another area where, like you say, teachers need more support? That's another area in which they need support, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, California has done a lot in that regard. I mean, California has really pushed for TK and really trying to expand early childhood options for everybody. But if I was a teacher, it would be really nice if the school I was working at actually had on-site childcare for younger children. I mean, that would be, and I know some schools are moving in that direction, and that is, people are well aware that that's where we should be heading. So it's just a question, finding the money and making it happen.
So if I'm a Californian who has school-age kids and I care about my local school system and I'm not thrilled with the teacher turnover or the availability of support for teachers or what the teachers have to go through, what can I do as an individual person? Should I be raising a stink with my legislators about certain bills that need to be passed? Should I be in the school trying to help out and volunteer if I can? Obviously, a lot of people can't. Is there anything that the individual parent who's concerned can do to either become more engaged or do something about it? Aside from following your reporting on CalMatters, of course. Which is...
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think there's no harm ever in contacting legislators and policymakers about your concerns and what you'd like to see happen. I mean, it's helpful too to talk to your kids' teachers. Find out what kind of help they need. If they're short on crayons or glue or Kleenex, go to Costco and get that for them. Hand sanitizer. Ask if they need help driving on field trips. Maybe once a year you can call in sick to work and help drive on a field trip. Little things like that, I think, just to make a teacher feel supported and keep in touch with the teacher. Like, hey, is my kid struggling? What can I do at home? Does my kid need a little extra help reading? Maybe I can spend a little extra time at night helping my kid with reading. I think even those little tiny things really make teachers feel like they're not alone in all this. And that, sometimes teachers, I think, feel that, families fight them on this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just to feel like everyone's on the same page. Everyone wants what's best for these children. So
at least get to know your teacher and understand them is the first step. We did a workshop this summer for high school journalism teachers who are doing journalism for the first time. And we invited them to Sacramento. We covered the expenses through a grant we got from a foundation. And it was very clear that teachers have to do so much themselves, put so much of their own money and time in. They were actually surprised this really was an all expense paid trip to Sacramento for a week with a hotel. And, can I really just charge this drink after the session to my hotel bill? And it just sort of highlighted the fact that teachers work so hard and put in so much, and including time, effort, their own material, bringing stuff from home, making that office supply run themselves. And there's that insulting line on the tax form, unless you take $250 off your taxes, when the teachers are spending so much more of their own money on just keeping their classrooms afloat. So I appreciate the sympathy for the teachers and the advice for what people can do. Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us. You're obviously going to stay on this story and on our education coverage, and we're going to be doing a lot more of it at CalMatters, and encourage people to talk about this in their communities, in the libraries, in the schools, and raise the awareness so more people can even just go introduce yourself to your teacher, shake their hand, tell them you're there to help, and see if you can do a little something to help out the class in whatever way you can, right? Great. Carolyn, thank you so much for doing this, and thanks to everybody who attended, and especially thanks to the California State Library for making this possible and helping us to take the stories that we're doing and share them with people in as many ways as possible, including through the 1,300 libraries across California. So thanks very much, everybody, and we'll do this again next month.